right. Well, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the world's most exciting classroom event. My name is Joe Gorowski, and I'll be your host for today. We are jumping into episode 5 today, geared to classrooms in Australia and New Zealand and surrounding spots. We have been doing events all the way along the journey of the Oosterschelde and the DARWIN200 since it left Plymouth in the United Kingdom way back in August 2023. For 2 years, it's following Charles Darwin's voyage of the Beagle. So we have done 63 events now, geared towards classrooms in North America and Europe and South America. So it's really fun to be doing these now each week until the end of the journey in July for classrooms in this side of the world as well. So let's have a quick catch up here. What has happened since we connected last? Well, last time we connected, we were out in the middle of the Tasman Sea. So I'm going to share my screen here. Make sure I pick the right one. There we go. And this will give you a nice idea of what's going on here. So you can see we left the North Island of New Zealand a couple of weeks ago from Auckland. And then we made our way across the Tasman Sea. And here we are. If I go over here to the coast of Australia, if I zoom in, you can see we're tucked in here nicely in Sydney Harbour. In fact, we are right close to the action, the CBD, the Opera House, the bridge. We are here in Darling Harbour, just tucked over here in front of the Maritime History Museum. So that is where we are. That will be our home berth for the next roughly 2 weeks. We'll be hanging out there. So that's where we are. It's great to be in Sydney. I'm going to fly out on Friday and join the DARWIN200 team there. And we're going to do a whole bunch of live events from the field. I'll send that schedule out really soon, but we have a lot of really fun things planned live in the field and a few surprises for classrooms too. So what was it like to sail into the harbor with a tall ship? Well, I have a little video here that one of our camera operators, Tom, edited together here for us. So I'm going to play that little video and you're going to see what it looked like when we came in to the harbor. Here we go. All right, so you can see we're a 3-masted schooner, over 100 years old. It's a Dutch tall ship. It's the last of its kind left in the world. You can see that we had some company there, one of the fire ships shooting water cannons up in the air to welcome us. There was a news helicopter flying with the ship and filming. One of the ships from the Maritime Museum came out to meet us. One of the other tall ships, I think it might have been the replica of the Endeavour, came out to meet us, which was really cool. And so you can see a little bit of what it looked like as we made our way into the harbor. Absolutely beautiful. A little cloudy, but can't complain. It's absolutely amazing. One of the best looking harbors in the world. All right. Well, we've got lots to do today. We're going to have a little recorded message from the ship coming your way shortly. We're going to have a Kahoot quiz. We're going to have, what else do we have on deck? Our experiments, our curiosities of the week, and a few more little things like that. But before we do, we have a live guest joining us. Really excited to have Christine Cooper joining us. She's joining us all the way from Western Australia. She's an environmental physiologist working at Curtin University in Perth. So she studies Australian birds and mammals and really looks at how they deal with changes in the environment. Particularly, I've hosted a few little events with her around the echidnas and the wombats and how they're adjusting to the heat changes that come along with climate change. So I'm going to bring Christine in with me right now. Hey, Christine, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you.
Good, great. Well, it's great to have you in a live event. We've done a few little recordings for classrooms, and I'll probably share those with our classrooms after today's event as well. But it's nice to have you live and get you to share the work directly with the students.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, I think I'll let you take over for a little bit. I've got your presentation tucked backstage. After that, we'll get into some Q&A action.
Okay. So I'm really interested in how animals deal with energy and water and temperature in the wild. And one thing that animals that are active during the daytime have challenges with is keeping their body temperature in acceptable limits. And in Australia, most of our animals are nocturnal. they're only active at night, and therefore they don't get as hot. But we have a couple of special species that are active during the daytime. And so I'm going to talk today a little bit about how we look at the thermal balance of echidnas and of numbats. So echidnas are really special. They're monotremes. They're really weird mammals. They lay eggs, they have spines, and they have really low body temperatures. And they've always thought to be really poor thermoregulators. So their lethal ambient temperature is meant to be only 35 degrees. In Australia, we get temperatures much, much hotter than that. And we thought that echidnas can only deal with behavior to deal with these high temperatures. So they're active in the daytime when it's cooler in winter, and then in summertime when it gets hot, they just go away and hide during high temperatures. So they behaviorally avoid being exposed to these high temperatures. But we did some work out in an area called Dryandra woodland where we have lots of echidnas, and we measured the temperature at which we found them active. We measured all sorts of different environmental measures of temperature and humidity, and we found that there are lots of times that the temperatures the echidnas were active at were higher than the temperatures which were supposed to kill them. And these are wild animals. They're actually choosing to be out and about. They're all happy and healthy and certainly weren't in any risk of dying. So clearly they're much more tolerant of high temperatures than what people expect them to be. And therefore, we wanted to know, how do they deal with this? They can't sweat like we do. They can't pant like dogs do. So how do they keep their temperature down? So we use some thermal imaging to do this. So we have a thermal camera, and it picks up the heat that is radiated from objects in the environment. So we filmed our echidnas as they were going about their business out in the field, and then we were able to look at different areas of the body and look at the different temperatures. And you'll note on this thermal image that where the animal is hot, it's losing lots of heat, is a yellowish colour, and where it's cold is a bluish purpley colour. So we could get an estimate of the temperature of different parts of the echidna's body. And when we did this, we found the echidna has ways of losing heat. So one thing it can do is it can lose heat by convection. So it can lose heat to moving air. And it does this in between its spines, in the little gaps between its spines, and areas that don't have very much fur or spine coverage. So the insides of the legs, for example. And echidnas can also lose heat by conduction. So if you put your hand on a cold bench top, for example, that bench top will feel really cold to you. Well, echidnas do a similar thing. They will lay down on the ground and they will lose heat from their ventral surface onto the ground. And therefore, they're dissipating some of that heat to the cold ground surface. The other exciting thing that we found is that echidnas can use their nose tip as what we call a wet bulb or an evaporative window. So echidnas have a big pool of blood under the tip of their nose, and what they do is they blow bubbles to keep their nose moist. So you can just see that little bubble blowing in the echidna there behind the tree, and that means their nose stays wet. Now, this is really important for them to find their food because they can pick up the electrical signals of their prey, and their nose needs to be moist to do that. But it has the other advantage of being cold. So by having the water evaporate off the tip of their nose, it makes their nose tip really cold. And you can see in these two pictures here that the nose is quite a dark purple colour. So it's really quite cold compared to the rest of the animal. And that's the heat that's being lost by the animal evaporating. So this explains how echidnas can deal with losing heat when they can't pant and they can't sweat. They are able to use evaporative windows and thermal windows to help dissipate the heat in their environment. Now, the other diurnal mammal that we have in Australia is the numbat. It's the only marsupial that's truly diurnal, and it's endangered. So it's really important that we understand how it can function in its environment. So we did a similar thing with numbats as we did with echidnas. It was a little bit harder for numbats because they are endangered. There's not so many of them around, but we were able to film 50 numbats over the course of a year in all different weather conditions when they were out and about active at Dryandra. So we did this, and then we created a heat balance model. Now, this slide is horribly complicated, and you don't have to learn all of it, but it's just to show that creating a heat balance model is complicated. So we have to measure environmental conditions. We had to measure the surface temperature of different parts of the numbat. We had to calculate the area of those different parts. We then had to build a numbat model, and then we had to look at all of the ways that the numbat exchanges heat with the environment. So convection, conduction, radiation. We had to take into account the sun, clouds, scattered radiation, all sorts of different mechanisms of heat exchange. And when we did this, we were able to work out when numbats were gaining heat and when they were losing heat. So most of the time when they're in the shade, they lose heat. But there are times when, even when they're in the shade, they're still gaining heat from their environment. And this means that they are not just relying on the heat that they produce from their metabolism, they're gaining environmental heat as well. Now, this is great for numbats to save energy. They eat termites, which are very poor in energy. So if they can gain heat from the sun, then they don't have to use as much of their own energy to stay warm. And their pelts are specially designed to help them gain heat. But it can be a bit problematic when they're living in hot conditions. So I did some work a long time ago that showed that numbats don't let their body temperature get above about 40 degrees. So we calculated how long it would take them to warm up to a body temperature of 40 degrees if they're out and about foraging. And this depends on the environmental temperature. But when it gets really hot, numbats will reach their maximum body temperature in only about 10 minutes, which suggests that when conditions are really hot, when it's really sunny, ambient temperature is high, they can only be out and about foraging for about 10 minutes. And clearly this is going to limit how much food they can find and ultimately limit where they might be able to live. So we need to use this information to decide where we might want to translocate numbats to if we're trying to establish new populations. We can't put them in places that get too hot. And we can also make some predictions about what might happen to them with global climate change as it gets warmer. So we've used this work to really think about how our special diurnal mammals that we have in Australia, our echidnas, our numbats, might be able to deal with changing climate and how we might manage those populations into the future.
Okay. Christine, did the slides freeze on us?
They seem to be progressing from my end.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's okay. I think just by the way you paused that maybe we're wrapped with the presentation.
Yep, we're done.
Okay. Perfect. I think it's funny. We tested before and everything went so smoothly, and it looks like it paused on just the last slide, so that's not really a big deal. Perfect. All right, let's take the slides away. Let's go back to full screen. I'm really super jealous because I love the work that you get to do. You get to be out in the field with the numbats, with the echidnas. It's pretty awesome. I know you mentioned monotremes, echidnas. We have our platypus, which is the other monotreme, the only egg-laying mammals, which is pretty cool. And the work you're doing is so important because the temperatures are changing, things are getting much warmer, and it's having an impact on those animals. And 10 minutes foraging, that is not a lot of time to look for food.
No, so it could become quite problematic for them. And we have to start to think about what aspects of their environment might be important. So we've always thought the open, clear areas are important for them to get their termites, but maybe shade is really important to them. And we have to think about where we might want to translocate them. So hot desert areas might not be the best places to put them. Maybe towards the south where it's a bit cooler might be better translocation areas.
All right. Well, I'm going to pull a Kahoot quiz up on the screen so our classrooms can play a little Kahoot with us. While that's loading, I'm going to take a few questions from the chat as well. So the first one is from Quinny. And Quinny would like to know why the echidnas have that long beak or that long nose.
Echidnas eat ants and termites, and so their long nose helps them get hold of their food. They've got a really long tongue, and then they poke their nose into the ground or into termite mounds and then use their long tongue to lick up the ants and termites. So lots of animals that eat ants or termites have these long noses to help them get their food.
All right. Very cool. So I'm going to put the screen share up here. So here we go. You should be able to see it now on your screen. You need to go to kahoot.it if you're going to join us today, kahoot.it, and then it's going to ask you for a PIN number. Today's PIN is 807-2034. So if you're lucky enough to have one-to-one tech at your seat, feel free to join that way. If not, your teacher could pop this up at the front of the classroom, and you could join and shout your answers out to him or her. If you're at home, use the QR code. You can scan and join that way. And then if you can't join with technology, a lot of our classes just like to do it in the classroom and see how they do. So another question for you, Christine, from the chat. How long, Eddie would like to know how long you've been doing your job, how long you've been out working in the field.
I've been at Curtin University for 20 years in February. So my 20-year anniversary is almost coming up. But I've worked at Drandra a bit longer than that because I also did my PhD work there. I worked on Numbats for my PhD, and that's when we realized it was a good place to work on echidnas as well.
All right. And then you work on birds as well. We didn't talk about birds today, but what are some of the species of birds that you've studied or worked with?
I work with lots of different species, but particularly parrots. So I'm just finishing up a project where we've looked at the evaporative water loss of 10 different species of parrot.
Okay. Let's grab one more from the chat and then we'll play our Kahoot together. So Paige would like to know, working in the field, what's the most interesting thing that you've seen?
Oh, that's really tricky. If you're in the field, you see all sorts of interesting things going on. Probably one of the most interesting and surprising things is when we were doing some work on echidnas and we heard them vocalizing. So we heard them making a noise, and that was a big surprise. They make a sound a little bit like a dove cooing, and we really weren't expecting that. And it probably took us about 15 years to hear it twice.
Okay, very cool. I have been lucky enough to see echidnas in the wild, but never have I heard them make a noise. So that's pretty cool to be able to observe that.
Yeah,
okay.
it was really surprising.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, let's play some Kahoot. I'm going to hit start here. True and false, the multiple choice questions, and then we'll see who comes out on the leaderboard today. So counting us in. And our first question is a multiple choice question. This is a multi-select. Pick 2 mammals that lay eggs. So you've got the echidna, kangaroos, sugar gliders, or the platypus. You need to pick 2 of these. It's a multi-select question coming your way. So 2 options there. A little clue decoding for you. And there we go. Time up on that question. And the answer is our monotremes. The echidna and the platypus are the only 2 mammals that lay eggs. I think that's just so wild, so cool. Okay, our next question coming up is true or false. Echidnas blow bubbles to help cool down. Is that true or is that false? You've got about 15 seconds to get an answer locked in. And then we will... There we go. Perfect. Good job, crew. That's absolutely true. If we go to our next question here, true or false, numbats are herbivores, meaning they're only eating plants. Is that true or is that false? That our numbats are herbivores, they're only eating plants. You got a few more seconds to get the answer locked in. All right. Good job, crew. That is false. We heard Christine say that they're out there looking for those tasty termites with that long tongue of theirs. That puts the smooth mouse into first place. And we have one more question before we do a little bit more Q&A. So when it's really hot, numbats can be out looking for food for only 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, or as much as an hour. So when it gets really hot outside, how long can the numbats last out there looking for something to eat? All right, 10 minutes. That is not a lot of time to find your food for the day. In third place, we've got the magic goose. In second place, the nimble falcon. And holding down that top spot, we've got the smooth mouse. All right. I'm going to come back from that screen share and turn off that music. If you are the classroom containing, or the classroom, the smooth mouse, I need you to send me a message to classroom@darwin200.com. I'm going to pop the banner up there in case you need it. Classroom@darwin200.com. Send me a message. All right. Well, Christine, let's get a few more questions here from the chat. Okay. Sam would like to know, in which parts of Australia would we find echidnas and numbats?
Now echidnas live all over Australia. They've actually got the widest distribution of any Australian mammal. They're found everywhere. But numbats are the opposite. They're only found in 2 natural populations in the southwest of Western Australia, so down here near Perth.
Right. Well, I think Liam can hear something in the background. So his question is, what pets do you have?
Yes, I have a bird. He's a rescue bird. He's a scarlet-chested parrot, and he really gets excited when I'm at home and talking. So he can hear me talking, and he wants the attention.
All right. So there we go. That's what we're hearing in the background. Very cool. All right. So let's get one more question coming your way, and then we're going to jump into the next segment of our world's most exciting classroom. So our final question for you, Christine, is what inspired you to study animals?
It's all I've ever wanted to do. So I actually went to a school reunion on the weekend, and we looked back through the yearbook and it said I wanted to be a zoologist. And so that's all I've ever wanted to do. I've always found animals to be fascinating, and I really enjoy having a job where I get to work with all sorts of really interesting species.
All right. Very cool. Well, Christine, it's so good to have you for a live event. We're loving our events for your side of the world, Australia, New Zealand, and any other classrooms who feel like joining us. And it's so great to have some content of some of those amazing endemic species that you have there in Australia. They're so special.
Yeah, we're pretty lucky with our wildlife down here.
All right. Well, Christine, enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you so much for being with us. And we'll let you continue with your day.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thanks, Christine.
See you later.
All right. Very cool to get to spend a little time with Christine. She does really exciting work out there in Western Australia, another beautiful part of the country. But it's definitely something to think about is as temperatures change, it makes it harder and harder for those species to survive, especially in those drier environments. And like we learned about the numbats today, 10 minutes is just not a lot of time to find your food for the day before you have to seek shelter because it just gets too hot. So I forgot to share a little picture with you before we brought Christine in, and I'm going to share that picture right now because while we were coming into the harbor, something really unusual happened. We had a visitor come to the ship. So here, this kookaburra came flying from somewhere on the shore. It landed on the mast of the ship, and then it didn't leave. It pretty much just took a free ride all the way to Darling Harbour, which is kind of wild. So I think that's a good sign that we got welcomed not only by some ships in the harbor, but we got welcomed by a kookaburra who joined us for our sail past the Opera House, under the bridge, and into Darling Harbour. That's pretty darn cool. So I'm going to come back from the screen share. And what I think we'll do next is last week you guys met George Karunas, a storm chaser, adventurer from Canada. He was doing some eDNA collection on the ship for us, collecting that environmental DNA. For those of you who might not remember, we can take samples of soil, we can take samples of water, and we can look at the DNA in that water and figure out what was there recently or what lives in there. So we've been collecting eDNA samples along the journey, and we have a scientist named Eric who is looking at them all and figuring out what is living in these different areas. So a lot of times you go out, you look around, and you just don't see all the animals, right? Especially because we're humans, we're loud, we make lots of noise, and they go the other way. But through eDNA, we can get a really good picture of what's there, even if we don't always see it. So George is in Sydney right now, and I met up with him yesterday, and we recorded a quick little video clip together from Darling Harbour. So I'm going to share that video right now, and let's see what George had to say. Here live with us right now in Darling Harbour. Hey, George, how are you?
I'm great, Joe. So good to see you, and it's so wonderful to be back in Sydney. It's been 10 years since I've been here, and it is an absolutely gorgeous city. 12 days out at sea, and finally back on solid land, and I can still feel the ground moving a little bit, I gotta say. It's quite the experience. We did arrive here in Sydney a day early because of some favorable winds that we had due to a storm that we weren't really expecting to spin up. This big squall came in a couple of nights ago. And as a storm chaser, it was fun for me, but also a little scary to be out there on the open seas and feeling the rage of Mother Nature's power. And we had lightning bolts, on either side of us, tremendous winds. I think we were in Beaufort, maybe 6 or 7 sea state. We were able to make up a lot of time because of the backing winds that we had. And we were able to get this sailboat up to over 10 knots, which is about 18 kilometers an hour, 18 and a half kilometers an hour. So we were just racing. And that's without any engine on, just the power of the wind. That was only on one sail. This ship is festooned with sails, and we only needed one to get up to that speed. That gives you an idea of the strength of the wind that we were encountering. And so we got into Sydney yesterday, and what a greeting we had. It was like they rolled out the red carpet for us. As we were coming into the harbor, there was the fire department there with their boat and shooting jets of water, these water cannons. It's kind of like the nautical version of fireworks announcing our arrival. There was another tall ship that was from the Nautical Museum here that came out that greeted us. And it was really nice. The two of us were sailing parallel to each other, and they even fired off a fake cannon shot at us, which I thought was kind of fun. And news helicopter overhead, drone flying, getting great video footage of us arriving, sailing right past the famous Opera House. Of course, the architecture of the Opera House is world known. And underneath the Sydney Harbour Bridge was really an epic moment as well. So right now we're docked here at Darling Harbour, right beside the Nautical Museum. And basically this is where my journey aboard the Oosterschelde comes to an end. It's been an amazing experience. It's had its ups and downs, quite literally, some really high highs, a few low lows, especially when I was feeling really seasick there for a couple of days, but got over that, and it's been just fantastic.
Yeah, it's a beautiful ship, but I imagine it felt a lot smaller when you were surrounded by that storm with the lightning and the wind and the rain.
Absolutely. When you look out on the horizon for day after day after day and see nothing but ocean, and then suddenly Mother Nature starts flexing her muscles, and you realize that if something goes wrong, you really have no one else to rely on other than yourselves and the crew and the ship itself. So you really feel very much like an astronaut out there floating in space, but in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, and I know once you got within the range of Australian waters, you were able to start collecting some more eDNA. So it sounds like you've got more samples ready to go for our project, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Once we were able to cross into Australian territorial waters, then I was able to grab some water samples for the environmental DNA project that's going on. And I thought it would be fun to actually grab one from Sydney Harbour right here. So there's a fresh sample that I'll be processing in the next couple of minutes after I'm off the call with you. I have no idea what we're going to find in Sydney Harbour, but I'm sure it'll be quite interesting. One thing to note that really blew us all away yesterday was, as we're coming into the harbour, a kookaburra bird, the famous Australian kookaburra, one of them landed on our mast. And these are typically not found in the city, let alone right in the middle of downtown Sydney. And it rode with us most of the way in through the harbour. It was almost as if the Australian wildlife had sent an ambassador to the ship to greet us. It was amazing.
That is a pretty good welcome. I think that bodes pretty well for our conservation projects with our Darwin leaders coming up. Oh man, I can't wait to see those pictures. That's really cool.
I've got so many photos to process and go through. It's I've got a mountain of things to do, and also I still want to see some of Sydney while I'm here, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the ship's in port. The eDNA project will be put aside for the moment until we get back underway again. What's the next few days hold for you, George? What are you going to try and get up to?
I'm going to be busy here in Sydney. I've got a lot of work to catch up on that I've been neglecting for the past couple of weeks. There's a media event coming up day after tomorrow, so I'll be involved with that. And then on the 18th, there's a really big event at Sydney Opera House where I'll be on stage with some of the other Darwin representatives and Darwin leaders, and it's going to be super, super epic. Really looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's going to be a good day. We're going to live stream our sail from Darling Harbour to the Opera House. I probably will run up to the Botanical Gardens. There's a big roost of flying foxes there, so I might do a little event with the flying foxes. So yeah, we definitely, and of course, we'll try and live stream the event at the Opera House. So that'll be a great day to have classrooms, especially in the Sydney area, tuning in. And then, of course, we'll have the recording for our classes on the other side of the world. So that should be a lot of fun.
And I'm going to be seeing you.
That's right. A few days, I'm flying out. And then I'm going to run all around New South Wales and Tasmania, getting out with as many projects as we can and hopefully broadcasting some really cool things to our classrooms.
Awesome. Leg 24 of the DARWIN200 expedition is now wrapped.
All right. Well, George, before we let you go, we always like to look around our surroundings. Do you mind turning the computer around a little bit and giving us the lay of the land?
Of course. So out that way is where we came in from. The harbour's entrance is down there. We got the beautiful skyline
district
of Sydney. There's the Maritime Museum over there. It's hard to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, over there. Another tall ship. So
yeah,
it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful harbor. Love it.
Perfect. Well, George, thank you so much. It was great to have you join us the last couple of weeks. Thank you for continuing the eDNA project. I'm so glad Mother Nature kicked up a little show for you before it wrapped up.
It's been wonderful. Thanks so much. And I'm signing off from Sydney.
All right. Thanks, George.
Cheers.
Okay, so there we go. A nice little update from George. I will see him in a couple days. And then who knows, maybe I'll take him out in the field with me and we'll have a couple live events together. So I do see a couple questions in the chat. One class would like to know, our class in Southern Australia would like, or South Australia would like to know if the kookaburra was laughing at us. I don't think he was making any calls. From what I've heard, it just kind of was up there and observing, just kind of checking out the view and enjoying the sail. Sienna wants to know what is going on the ship when not collecting samples. So the last time I sailed on the ship was from Peru to Ecuador a few months ago. And there's lots of stuff that you can get up to. So a lot of the time when I had free time, I would read on the deck. Sometimes I do live events for classrooms. There's really interesting people. So on each leg of the journey, there's 20 passengers that come on board. So there's really interesting passengers from around the world who you can meet and talk to. I spent some time doing a little bit of work on the boat and editing some videos. And then I always had my camera with me because you never knew what you were going to find. Maybe a beautiful sunset or sunrise. Sometimes the ocean's empty like a desert. And then all of a sudden there's 100 dolphins swimming and racing with the ship. There's seabirds and all kinds of things like that. So then when you're on a ship, you're on a watch. So what that means is that for 4 hours at a time, you are taking care of the ship. So your watch is taking care of the ship. So you're raising and lowering sails, climbing up in the masts, and doing things like that to keep the ship sailing and making its way towards the next destination. So you would think that with not a lot to do as you're sailing, it would feel like a really long trip, but actually the time goes really, really fast. It's so beautiful to be sailing on the ocean, climb up the masts, and just look around and see nothing but ocean as far as you can see for 360 degrees. It's pretty cool. And then Troy wants to know, what do you do if you're going to vomit? So I'm pretty lucky. I've never been seasick, but a lot of the people who have been on the Oosterschelde have been seasick. A friend of mine was on board once in Chile, and he couldn't get out of bed for 3 days. So he was really, really seasick. Sounds like George was a little bit seasick, but after a couple days, it usually kind of wears off. So I think the best thing to do is if you're seasick on deck, you want to get to the edge and maybe get that out into the ocean. And then if you're really not feeling well in your cabin, hopefully you have something like a bucket that you can keep because you don't want to make that big mess on the ship. Okay, so great to see George in Darling Harbour, and I will see him in a couple days, and we will spend some time going live around Sydney together. So we had an experiment 2 weeks ago. We looked at capillary action. So I've got the results of our experiment from the Darwin studio. I'm going to play that for you now. And then I've got some results that a classroom sent in for us as well.
Welcome back. What were the results of your capillary experiment? Well, let's have a look at mine. As you may remember, I put in blue food colouring into the beaker on this side here. I put in yellow in here, and I left it running for 1 hour, 2 hours, and 4 hours. After 1 hour, I noticed that the food colouring solutions had crept up the paper towel. This is actually going against the force of gravity because of the capillary action of the towel. The water is passing through the fibres inside the towel and being absorbed through the towel and actually then going into the beaker in the middle. By 2 hours, I noticed that the solutions were dripping into the middle beaker and it was slowly filling up. And after 4 hours, the contents of the 3 beakers had pretty much equalised. Note the one in the middle is a mixture of the blue solution and the yellow solution, so that it appears this wonderful green colour. The transportation of these fluids through the fibres of this tissue paper partly explains how many plants absorb water and solutions of nutrients into the microscopic structures in their roots and then into their vein-like xylem. Now let's find out how you got on and look at some of the results that you sent in. Let's also see who won those 3 £50 Amazon voucher prizes.
All right. So it just so happens that I do have some results handy. Our crew at Naircourt Primary in South Australia sent us in some results. Let me share my screen here. Oops, I think I closed it by accident. I'll have to open it one more time. There we go. So if I click the right button, we will get that to share, and then we'll take a look at their results. There we go. Now it's loading. Now we're getting there. Perfect. Okay, so there we go. You can see they listed the equipment that they used, how they got it ready. So you can see some of the students there. They're adding their green food coloring to the beakers, blue in another one. Folding the paper towel, that's a pretty important step. And then there we go. They had very similar results. Ooh, theirs got really dark with the blue and the green mixing together. And you can see it evened out in the middle. And you can see the way the liquids in both sides moved through the towel, through that capillary action, and against gravity to go up and then into the beaker. That's really cool. All right. Well, we need to do our curiosity of the week, but we still have a nice little bit of time in our event. So I have another special little clip that I want to share with our classrooms today. So each week we've been catching you up on the journey. So I've been playing little clips from different places that we visited along the way. Last week, I think I shared a little bit from the Galapagos. This week, I want to share a little bit from the Falkland Islands. So the Falkland Islands are just off the southern coast of South America. They are very remote, windswept islands, but being so remote, they are jam-packed with wildlife because there's not a lot of people there. The animals are kind of left to do their own thing. And there's big populations of elephant seals and different species of penguins, some really unique bird species. And we spent some time there. We had Darwin leaders out there working on projects in the field. And so I thought what I'd share tonight is a little clip of some of the wildlife of the Falklands. So I'm going to load that clip up right now, and let's take a look at some of the wildlife that you can find in the Falkland Islands. Nice. So there we go. That is some of the really cool wildlife in the Falklands. You saw a lot of penguin species that call the islands home, and those really big elephant seals. So those big males, they like to control the beach, control a group of females on the beach. And if other males show up, well, then there's those epic battles where they fight until the other one gives up and leaves. Awesome. So seeing those penguins is a really good introduction to our experiment for this week, because our experiment this week looks at sea ice. So I'm going to load that experiment for you to check out right now. As always, you have 2 weeks to try the experiment with your classrooms. Then send us in some pictures of your results to classroom at DARWIN200.com. Let's take a look at our experiment looking at sea ice.
Welcome back. Today's experiment explores the impact of the rising sea level of our world. I'm sure you've heard of climate change and the fact that our planet's temperatures are warming each year, year after year. Well, that has a big impact on the icy North Pole and the icy South Pole. As the temperature rises, the ice melts. It's believed that 150 billion tons of ice is melting each year in Antarctica alone. Since Charles Darwin's voyage, which started in 1831, global sea level has risen over 20 centimetres. And some scientists believe that it could rise a further 70 centimetres by the year 2100. And that could have a massive impact on people living in coastal cities and coastal communities. There are two main types of ice at the poles. Sea ice, which floats basically as the ocean freezes, and ice sheets, which are basically the accumulated layers of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or in some cases even millions of years of icy snowfall and ice accumulations. The very important difference is that ice sheet forms on land, whereas sea ice floats on the ocean. How these different ice sheets melt and the runoff from them has a huge impact on rising sea levels. And that's what today's experiment is all about. To do this experiment, you need 2 containers of exactly the same size. This is really important. If they're not the same size, this won't work exactly as it should do. You also need plasticine or clay. Ideally that's white, it doesn't have to be though, but if you can get white, it's better. Put that inside the containers, like you can see here, I've done with these 2. It has to be pretty much the same section. It shouldn't be right to the top, but it should cover a third or around about a half of your container. This is meant to represent land. You then need water and you need ice. Then you can draw a polar bear to represent the Arctic. Polar bears only occur in the north. They do not occur in the southern polar regions. So you can put that little marker in one of your containers. Then you can draw a lovely little penguin to represent the Antarctic. Penguins only occur in the southern hemisphere, in the southern polar regions. So you have very different wildlife in the South Pole and the North Pole. So let's put him in there. So you've got Antarctica, where most of the ice is the ice sheet on land, and the Arctic, where much of the ice is the sea ice, the floating ice in the ocean. Now you're ready to add your ice. Try and get ice cubes that are all pretty much the same size. So for the Arctic, put the ice in to represent floating sea ice. So remember your clay or plasticine represents land. Put in 10 or 15 or however many cubes that you can fit into your container into the water section, into the ice. I think I'll put in 10 in here. There we go, 3 more. Right, next for Antarctica, you've got to carefully balance exactly the same number on land, on the plasticine. So I put in 10 in the last container, so I've got to put 10 in here. Let's see what the difference is. Let's put those in here. That's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now you're ready to add your ocean. get some water. It can be any water, tap water is absolutely fine. And you have to fill the 2 containers to exactly the same level. This is very important. So I'm going to carefully do it to about something like halfway. Let's try this one and this one here. Oh, I think I might need a little bit more water in that one to bring the level up to the same. That looks about the same there. Then with a permanent marker, mark the level of the water on your container. So that's there, perfect. And this one here. Now you have to leave your experiment and imagine the warming climate and the ice melting. What do you think will happen? Do you think there'll be a difference when the floating sea ice melts compared to the ice sheet on land? Well, you have to leave it for a while until the ice melts to find out. Send in photographs of your experiment and complete the results sheet on the DARWIN200 website. Send your entries to classroom@darwin200.com for a chance to win one of 3 £50 Amazon gift voucher prizes. Good luck, and please join me in 2 weeks' time to find out the results of this really interesting sea level rise experiment.
All right, so there we go. That is our experiment for the next 2 weeks. It fits in nicely with our event today. We talked about climate change and how it's impacting the numbats and the echidnas in Western Australia. We saw those penguins in the Falklands. And yeah, it's a very interesting experiment. I think you'll be very surprised by the results. And it'll tell you a little bit about sea ice and the ice on land, the glaciers, and give you an idea of what happens to our oceans when each one of them melts. Okay, so classroom@darwin200.com is where you want to send some results, some pictures over the next 2 weeks. Before I do our curiosity to wrap up for this week, I am on George Karunis's Instagram page. I'm going to share that right now. And the reason I want to share that with you is George talked about a little storm that they were in. And so here's a little video of what it was like to be on deck during part of this storm. Let's see if I can make it a tiny bit bigger. There we go. So you can see they're all bundled up in their wet rain gear. It's nighttime. The light's on the front of the mast, and you can see the rain just pouring down on them. And so we're not even seeing the worst of it. When he talked about it, there was lightning on both sides, big waves. So this might have been a little calmer when it was just rain, but that gives you an idea of what it would have been like to be on the ship in the dark, in the rain, in the middle of this squall, this little storm. Okay, let's get to our curiosity. So we did have some good guesses for this week's curiosity. Most of the guesses realized it was a plant or part of a plant, and we had some right answers with it being a pitcher plant. So pitcher plants are pretty cool, carnivorous plants. They get some of their nutrients from the soil, but they also get some nutrients from things like insects and even small mice and frogs fall into these pitchers. In other places like Indonesia, they can grow to be really big. So things bigger than insects sometimes fall into these pitchers. So let's take a look at the curiosity from the studio.
Week, I asked you to try and guess what this object here is. Some of you guessed an orchid, some of you guessed a flower. It's actually the pitcher of a pitcher plant called Nepenthes. We have an entire episode next week dedicated to carnivorous plants, which Charles Darwin studied in immense detail. So if you guessed pitcher plant or carnivorous plant, you were right. Well done, and I hope you'll try your luck on this week's Curiosity of the Week.
All right, we are going to do that right now. We have a brand new curiosity for you. It's going to load up here in the background. Remember, curiosities are different than the experiment. You only have 1 week to send in your answer to the curiosity.
This week's curiosity is this beautiful green stone. This one's been polished so you can see this amazing coloration and pattern. Can you identify what this is? It's a very famous type of stone. I'll give you a bit of a clue. It has something to do in common with these other objects I have here on my desk. this electrical wiring, these coins, and this piping. This is from a water pipe. What do you think these objects have to do with this beautiful blue stone? For your chance to win a £50 Amazon gift voucher prize, send in your best guesses to classroom@darwin200.com. Join me in 1 week's time and I'll reveal the answer. Good luck and see you then.
All right, so there you go. Now, the stone that Stu had there was a polished one. So it had been put into a rock tumbler and smoothed out over several days, and you get that nice smooth polish. I happen to have the same material here, but this has not been through a tumbler, a rock tumbler. This is just how it would have looked when it came out of the earth. So you can see this really cool green color. So that is your curiosity of the week. What kind of stone is it? So classroom@darwin200.com. Send in your best guesses and we will have an answer for you next week. Well, there we go. That is episode 5 in the books. Thank you so much to our classrooms for being with us. A huge shout out to Christine for sharing her work in the field with numbats and echidnas. And of course, it was great to see George in Darling Harbour. So we're glad we were able to take some time and make that recording for you to see. Yeah, the last thing we have to do today before we sign off is a shout out to our sponsors, supporters, our partners, without whom we wouldn't be doing these live classroom events. We wouldn't be sailing around the world, and we definitely wouldn't be training the young conservationists in every port. So we're thankful and grateful to our partners, our supporters, for everything that they do. So thanks, everybody. We will see you next week for episode 6, where I will be live in Sydney. So that should be fun. But yeah, we'll wrap up with a little video message for our partners.